The Soldier, Season of Storms, Year 1.
Dominus, this place got few bar.
As the child of 2 militarists, Ruslana wasn't particularly devout. A common enough position amongst the brass, to be sure. But like most, she had been around the various orders enough to occasionally, and almost on reflex, interject a complaint to Dominus, the old soldier, and whomever might be listening from up on high. Besides, it really was FUBAR. They had taken their time getting to the village proper, because Calimere had been seeming particularly out of breath recently. But from the distance, it had still looked like a village, with roofs and walls and yards. Not the yards, actual yards, the kind you might read about. That was clearly not the case, however. The trees had been bent back from the force of a wildfire, or perhaps a very purposeful fire. Ruslana wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but it didn't look like the village had just been hit by a freak accident, that was for sure. Someone must have survived, or passed by, however, because worn and waterlogged graves, already being eroded by the storms, had been thrown together.
Do you think it's the deadhead?
Ruslana asked, chewing on some of the bark she had chopped earlier. The stuff was a mild pain reliever, and better still, full of nutrients. With time, she figured she could distill it down into something resembling a field ration, with about as much flavor and twice the fiber.
Not likely. Grendolf is more subtle, usually. He gets angry, but he's focused on a goal, and this doesn't really affect us at all. It's a shame about the people who used to live here, though. I hope most of them got out alive.
Calimere shook her head, frowning intently.
So we're possibly dealing with another target on top of Grendolf. Fantastic. I guess we just have to keep pursuing him, and see if we can flush this guy, or guys, I guess, out of hiding.
Calimere had been kneeling on her sword, perhaps in prayer, but more likely taking a breather. She had perked up a bit since earlier, but still wasn't in the best of shape. Ruslana didn't like the fact that the hero kept on trying to seem like it was no big deal.
So, what's a Dominus? Hell, I dunno if I'm the sort of person you should be asking that, Kaylee.
Ruslana chuckled, then relented.
Back at home, we have these orders. The cult of Dominus, the cult of the Shaper, the cult of the Wisest. Some are gods, I guess. Others are kind of humans that supposedly just zapped into gods themselves one day. But they're all really just faces of Dominus. I don't get it either. Sounds complicated, and as good a thing to swear about as any. I guess more importantly, you're used to seeing this kind of thing, Lana. Yeah.
Ruslana watched her breath rise into the cool air, smoky and intangible.
Unfortunately. We should probably keep on the trail of Grendolf, but without a place to stock up, I'm out of ideas. We could go back into the mountains and wait for the weather to clear, I suppose.
Calimere shook her head emphatically.
That'll still be a month, at least. And that's a month of waiting, which means a month of ignoring whatever Grendolf has planned and whomever torched this place. We should keep trudging, though I've got a heroic hunch that it'd be best to stay out of forests for now.
Ruslana half smiled, wondering if the hunch had anything to do with the fact that it kept their field of vision open and clear, hopefully enough to spot things like this before they happened. And it must have happened fast. Fire at a great distance should have been visible, even just smoke. And yet, the new rules of this new world were becoming less confusing, but that didn't mean Ruslana felt comfortable just yet. The squeaky wheels of a cart stumble running through the strangely solid and lumpen ground immediately set both women on edge. Calimere kept her hand at her side, not drawing her blade, but Ruslana quickly drew a bead on the shocked newcomer, dropping it before his cart had the time to crash out of his hands and into the muck.
Yikes, you two nearly gave me a heart attack. Don't scare a guy like that. Please. In the future.
The purple man, who looked for all intents to be demonic in nature, sagged against his now stuck cart in relief. Calimere was already over and helping to dislodge it, much to the man's repeatedly murmured thanks. Ruslana circled him a few times, boots stomping through the mud.
Kind of weird for a traveler to be wandering through a ruined village with a cart though, stranger. Not that we meant to frighten you, but you aren't here to profiteer or anything, right?
Frowning dismissively, the small man shook his head.
Me? Heck, no. For one, if I wanted to do that, I wouldn't need to rummage around in the carrion, I'd just find what I want and take it. The nose knows and all that. Secondarily,
taking the reins of his cart and thanking Calimere one last time, the stranger pulled a oddly quilt-like tarp off from over it, exposing several strange baubles, jewels, and accessories. Almost all, valuable beyond belief, at least from appearance alone.
I'm a trader. Mostly of fine curios, as you two can see. Not that you would know that with my boss sending me on these stupid errands. Anyway. Name's Mammon, Mr. Mammon. Pleasure's mine.
He held out his hand, and they shook it in turn. Ruslana noted that despite his friendly enough manner, he also had a shoulder pack full of scrolls, notes, and maps. Merchant or not, her suspicion didn't recede, only heightened. Calimere, on the other hand, grinned cheerfully.
You wouldn't happen to have any food hidden there, would ya? I could probably see my way to buying some if you did.
Mammon immediately smiled widely, clearly thrilled at returning to an atmosphere he felt familiar in. Removing his pack, he placed it on the wooden base of his cart, and clicked something. The pack unfolded into a display booth with multiple compartments, one of which had several tinned items labeled with great care.
Now, I'm not one to split hairs with new friends, but let's see. Food can be pretty rare when the storms are in season. HRMN.
But his eyes bulged as Calimere reached into a jacket pocket and pulled out several gold-colored coins that shone brightly amidst the rain. One side held the image of a stately older woman, surrounded by a wreath or garland, the other, an embossed palace against a terraced hill.
Or you could just pay me with those. I imagine new currency for food is a fair enough deal.
Ruslana considered interrupting with a threat, but Calimere didn't seem to mind at all.
Seems fair enough to me, though I've got an extra condition. Why don't you sit down and talk with us while we eat? Least we can do for nearly trapping you here in the muck, alone and in need of heroes.
Mammon shrugged his shoulders, then looked over them, as if afraid a specter might appear if he didn't.
Well, what the heck? I'm off the clock right now, and it can't hurt to shoot the breeze a bit. I was kind of hoping to find what I was sent here for, after the tongue thrashing the boss gave Krim. Seems it wasn't meant to be, though.
Despite the Spartan nature of the tins, each contained a full meal, squashed into almost comical portions to maximize space. Blueberry cobbler, though Ruslana wasn't sure if they were actually blueberries, fried dough with some sort of curd and mushroom filling, and sliced strips of aged and tenderized meat, or possibly truffle steak. They ate in silence for some time, and Ruslana noticed that Calimere never stopped staring at Mammon. She was never intimidating, and didn't ever frown or glare at him. But the hero's expression was unwavering, and after some time, the openly shaking demon spluttered a comment.
Well, if you've got to ask me something, go ahead. You're creeping me out as it is, sheesh. Right, just making sure we were on the same page. Haha, sorry about that. You've mentioned a boss of yours several times. This guy. Would you say he's big, skeletal, like serpents? The boss. Unless big is a synonym for gaunt, I'd say unlikely. He is pretty bony, though, and I don't know about the latter. I'm beginning to think a snake pit wouldn't be out of character. Well, how about this? Is he the sort of fella that'd burn a village down?
Calimere wasn't smiling anymore. Mammon gulped slowly, but his fear was gone, replaced with a careful and crafty suspicion.
If you're asking what I think you're asking, yeah. Probably. Definitely. Doesn't mean he did, mind, but like I said, I'm off the clock.
Nodding, Calimere returned to her food with a sour expression, and Ruslana coughed.
Well, Mr. Mammon. Why do you work for this guy if he's such a taskmaster? If I were you, I'd either run off on my own or find a way to express my extreme displeasure.
Snorting, Mammon shook his head.
Friendship, I guess. Sometimes you just meet people and fall in line with them even if you don't really like them, and even if they treat you poorly. Maybe I feel like you do, and maybe that doesn't change anything. I don't particularly like selling information at such a low cost, so how about some quid pro quo?
Ruslana pursed her lips, but shot a look at Kaylee Muir, who nodded in reply.
Sure. Shoot. Have you seen it? I guess it'd look like a really big hole. It should have been visible from the sky, but we're beginning to think it's been protected somehow. The boss is rambling about magic and stuff that's way beyond my pay grade. You would know it though. Lots of screaming, hellish noises, crumbling gravel. That sort of thing.
Ruslana didn't respond for some time, trying to imagine just the sort of chasm Mammon was describing.
No. Wow. Definitely not.
But Kaylee Muir nodded, slowly.
I've seen something like that, once before. Once, long before. Our current target was trying to open up a gate to some ancient sleeping evil. It turned out even he was mistaken about the thing, though, and the hole turned out to be a dead end.
Mammon groaned and placed his head between his hands.
Great. Just great. Not that he'll believe it, but that's the sort of thing any sane person would say, and my boss'll probably go nuts over. Still, thanks. You two aren't so bad, so I'll throw in something else for free. If you see a big old tower, don't come near it. I don't even know what my boss is planning anymore. Maybe Krim'll have some better news for me. Anyway. Farewell, or whatever.
With the tip of his hat, Mammon reconverted his pack, slipped it over his shoulders, exhumed his cart, and was on his way, leaving the two adventurers with 2 tins of food that seemed more delicious now that it was a distant memory, the rain, and their thoughts.
So? Target number 3? Possibly.
Ruslana said first.
Probably. Why is it that there are so many people who just want to do crazy stuff? Can't they do crazy stuff that improves the world, or just ends up harming themselves? Well, I think that Mammon guy is mostly trustworthy.
Ruslana spluttered, half laughing and half sneering.
That wretched imp? He was probably lying to us the entire time. I would have shaken him down instead of paying him for that food, which I'm still betting you he stole. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I think it's precisely the fact he was tempted to lie to us that kept him honest.
Kaylee Muir shrugged, and the seriousness of her expression made Ruslana feel slightly guilty, and strangely self-conscious.
People who are scared tend to want to find someone they can be honest to, even if they lie by habit, or profession. People like that need heroes, too. If anything, Mammon was frightened, and his boss sounds frightening. Those two things are probably true. But, on a brighter note, I can say with reasonable certainty that Grendolf probably isn't here. And, what makes you say that? He'd definitely butt heads with anyone trying to contest his status. I think more villainous types end up falling to inter-evil disputes than heroics, sometime. Chances are, Grendolf is hiding in some part of the void between dimensions, biding his time. Which means...
This was what Ruslana knew.
Which means we go after this mysterious tower, right?
Kaylee Muir cheered, then coughed and wiped the blood and effluvia from her nose.
Gak, that is nasty. I'll stop it up later, but for now? We're fed and watered, and I think that's a kind of minor victory. Now, we could just follow that Mammon guy back to wherever he's headed, but I imagine he's the kind of guy that gets suspicious fast. And your suggestion is? We fly.
Ruslana couldn't stop laughing even as they made the long journey back to their mountain base. That wasn't entirely true. She had been serious while she and Kaylee Muir reinforced the graves in town, of course. But the idea of Kaylee Muir flying on her own power, and trying to imagine what she herself would look like, grappling pointlessly with the sky, kept intruding into her mind. The journey uphill was steep and treacherous, the mud underfoot slush-like and decent enough as a foothold, but also decent enough that you grew complacent. And falling back meant falling down, sliding along the slope until you hit something hard enough to break your fall. So they made it a point not to fall. But it was what happened when they got back to camp that amazed Ruslana the most. Kaylee Muir fell to work in a flurry of activity, the only sign she had gone from place to place the occasional splatter of blood. And when she was done...
Haha! Behold, 2 gliders, fit to fly. With this, there's no way we can't cruise above the canopy, find the tower, and defeat the bad guys.
In the past, Ruslana might have tried to find a hole in Calamir's plan, or perhaps say something skeptical. However, as she looked at the crudely constructed but lovingly crafted gliders.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do this.
The first and last flight of the gliders was a thing of beauty. Despite Calimere having tested hers before, that had been in a sunny and cloud-free environment. Not the middle of the season of storms. As it turned out, pulpy woodcraft is weak against pouring and froze rain, but even still. For a few moments, Ruslana soared above the clouds, able to fly with impunity as the island unfurled below her. The breeze ended up ruining the freedom first, then the roar of thunder and finally the hail, as big as daggers and just as sharp. Soon the gliders were crashing down towards a rocky beach between the rocks and the lake, and Ruslana was prying herself from the wreckage for what seemed like the second time. Still, she was largely unharmed and entirely too excited to feel worried about herself, especially since she had seen the tower, or what she assumed was the tower. Calimere was all but entirely unhurt, and laughing enthusiastically.
We did it! Glider, Mark II, you shall be missed. Villainy, prepare yourself.
Her wooden sword flashed in the pouring rain, the blade glowing despite no light visible to reflect off of it.
Hey, could you not do that?
The two turned, to face a man slightly older than them. He wore a rather worn blue jacket, had a tuft of black hair, and what's more, Ruslana could have sworn.
I'm sorry, but do I know you?
From behind his glasses, the man squinted, trying to place a name to the face in front of him.
Maybe. Were you involved in the project?
A sudden discomfort crept up the back of Ruslana's spine, and Calimere, who had immediately obliged with a somewhat sheepish grin, jaunted over, head tilted in confusion.
No, I wasn't. I mean, I was sent over, but...
The man whistled, not quite frowning.
So they went through with it, hey? I agreed to test the thing, and have been here for a year? It's weird, but I wasn't expecting them to actually send people through, let alone live long enough to have that chance. Paul. Ruslana.
They shook hands, and Paul turned to Calimere.
Calimere, though I have to ask, what kind of name is Paul? The name my folks gave me, obviously. Not quite as grand as some, but it works well enough. I run a noodle and refreshment stall here. It didn't get the best business, but it was enough to get by. Now that weird tower is in town, people stop by to challenge it and stop here to fortify themselves. Business is pretty good.
And indeed, now that Ruslana's ears weren't ringing and her nose wasn't full of sand, she could smell the unmistakable scent of food. Actual food. Not just that, but it was being cooked in front of her. For behind Paul was a rather sturdy-looking stand with a frying table, a steamer, several water pits and pans. And from the table, what a smell! Fried and salted goodness mixed with the fresh rain to drift enticingly over the breeze, sizzling invitingly as Paul ambled back over and began to sift some of the noodles over.
I do one thing, and I do it right. You come here to get noodles. You want ramen? I've got ramen. You want yakisoba? I can do that. Banmian? No problem. Spaghetti? Like your parents used to make. The freshest pho with the best stuff I can catch from the lake. Vermicelli like no other. I'll even do teppanyaki or crepes, but only because you're the first person I've met from the yards.
Paul then paused and added.
And I've also got like 30 cases of cucumber soda, if you're interested. So. You buying?
Calimere was already reaching for more coins, but Ruslana cut her off.
I've got this one, Kaylee. I think. Paul, it's completely cool if you turn this down, but...
Unzipping her duffel, Ruslana removed a carefully folded ration slip, the only information still visible the red stamp on the back. Paul whistled and took a close look.
Red, hey? I don't think I've seen one of these for a while. We usually got the purple slips, which were pretty nice. I can't even remember what they served for red. Half a loaf of bread and some sort of meat, probably. Something like that. Any chance I can redeem it? For old time's sake, that'll get you a bowl of pho each and a cucumber soda, because I cannot move this stuff for the life of me. But I'm expecting serious payment next time. Because you wouldn't believe how useful it can be to have a reserve of hard currency laying around.
Paul tucked the slip into his pocket and set to work. Kaylee Muir fidgeted impatiently in her seat, doing her best to seem dispassionate.
So, you seem pretty certain that we'll be back for more. I am,
Paul replied with a grin. After a brief pause, he clarified.
This is my life. Has been since I got here. It beats the hell out of corporate accounting, that's for sure. Anyway. Well, I'm making your soup. What's on your mind, ladies? This weather is something, isn't it? Yeah, though hopefully not so bad that we can't trek to the tower from here. Sorry to put a damper on your business attraction, but whoever is dwelling it is probably bad news, and we're out to bust em.
Kaylee Muir chuckled, eyes not once leaving the heavenly feast that was being crafted in front of them.
Not likely to happen. I'll just say that there was a clash of heroes and villains nearby, make some kind of special promotional item, and hope for the best. I mean, can you imagine? Heroic noodle stall owner patron to champions of justice. Could look good on a resume, if people around here used resumes.
The broth was steaming hot and calming, and against the rain seemed to make the troubles of before seem distant and far away. Ruslana could see the color return to Kaylee Muir's face, if only for now, and herself found the noodles rich and delectable, almost as much so as the mussel or clam analogues that Paul had managed to fish up. It wasn't exactly authentic, sure, but neither was the meat grown in a vat they'd had back home. Having had the second good meal in a fairly short span of time, Kaylee Muir seemed quite pleased with herself, though not so pleased that she had forgotten her goals, and Ruslana could see the good cheer slowly shifting into somber reflection as the rain fell overhead.
About how far would you say the tower is from here, Paul?
She asked, expression now entirely serious. The man shrugged, cleaning his stand as he stared into the sky, rain splattering across his glasses as he thought.
Maybe a week or two, at most. It's rough terrain, but someone's been clearing the trees at a pretty incredible rate. I'm all but expecting a road before too long, to be honest. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, hard to say. If you're really thinking of going, you should be prepared for a trip. Kaylee.
Ruslana suddenly felt very small, the comfort at finding a place of safety in the island similar to feeling like one had found the eye of a storm.
Do you honestly feel up to this?
Kaylee Muir nodded, rising to her feet. She was still a little unsteady, but determined.
Yeah, Lana. I think we should probably go, Paul. Thank you for your contribution to heroism. I wish you the best of luck in your noodle vending, and you can put that down as the hero. Kaylee Muir. Having said that,
Paul looked like he was going to say something serious, then shrugged and smiled crookedly.
Hell. You folks be safe, too. Don't get yourselves killed, and come on back here sometime.
He waved as they disappeared into the distance, and soon the tantalizing smell of frying foodstuffs disappeared, replaced by the overpowering scent of recently cleared forestry and burnt fields. And far, far in the distance, a tower stood, as much a landmark as a small hill. It was not a huge tower, nor completely finished. The rocks it was made of looked oddly shaped and unnatural, as if some had been carved from the earth and some had left of their own volition, frozen into place for all eternity. It lanced up into the sky and then stopped abruptly, and Kaylee Muir clutched her sword at the sight of it to the point that her knuckles grew white-hot in rage.
Whoever lives there? I can tell.
Her eyes shut, and the hero sighed.
I can tell.
Ruslana tried to think of something comforting to say, but nothing came to mind. The two didn't even have to hack through any wilderness or face any opposition as they trudged towards the tower. Where the unnatural hack-and-slash-clearing of nature ended, Ruslana could occasionally make out a weakened, perhaps starving animal or two staring at them as they passed, but the animals were too cowed and frightened to do much more than watch, and so their journey passed peacefully. They arrived at the entrance to the place in the dead of night, when whatever light shone from above seemed distant and weak. A huge open pit quarry surrounded the tower, but no sounds of work came from within. The whole tower was as quiet as the grave. Inside, the tower was Spartan and unfurnished. Unfinished tapestries that were just undyed cloth hung from the walls, most likely put there as an afterthought. Shelves without books and chests without supplies or treasure lined the first floor, and the second, and the third. Finally, with a mighty yell, Kaylee Muir ran up the stairs, not stopping until she had reached what the two assumed was intended to be the middlemost floor, a throne room, and was at the moment where the construction had stopped, halted. For the tower was completely empty. Kaylee Muir bit her lip as blood trickled from her nose, down to her fingers and onto the floor. Ruslana kept looking for something, anything, a clue as to what might have happened, and yet as distant thunder roared from outside, the emptiness hung around them, jeering and mocking them. Finally, they left the tower as they came, slowly searching the rooms thoroughly and dejectedly.
Do you think it was a trick? It was probably a trick. I imagine whoever lives there is just waiting to spring out at us. Or, if they're out doing other stuff, we can wait here and surprise them. Right.
Kaylee Muir nodded in response, slowly. The wind had been knocked out of her sails, and confusion had set in to replace it. Ruslana closed her eyes and tried to imagine the way she had inspired recruits back home. None of them seemed appropriate, not for a friend who was confused and doubting, and ultimately, perhaps even more alone than she was.
Kaylee.
Ruslana placed a hand to Kaylee Muir's, and clasped it tightly.
I promise I'll keep watch, all night long. We'll wait here, and we'll find out whoever set up shop here. And if you're right about Grendolf, which you are, I can tell, we'll probably find him, too, when he arrives to lock horns with the owner of this gaudy architectural eyesore. Right.
Kaylee Muir smiled. Her exhaustion clearly not mental, but physical.
Yeah. That sounds great, Lana. I trust you. That sounds great.
And Kaylee Muir closed her eyes, sleeping fitfully on her feet until Ruslana was able to improvise a bed and covers for her, and then, the hero slept fitfully under the rain, Ruslana feeling the deluge overhead weaken and wane as the season began its gradual decline. Chapter end.